I'm going first because you said I'm the elder. That's an African country. Thank you. Thank you for all being here. It's my honor to sit here and make a presentation before you. Having said that, I will start from the report by Article 18. That was a regional report. We have seen that freedom of expression is suffering in East Africa. And while he was speaking about East Africa, about the state of press freedom in East Africa, I was thinking about Africa as a whole. And the final conclusion is that media press freedom is suffering in East Africa. But then let's look at this in the context of Africa and say how's the press doing in Africa as a whole? How's West Africa doing, for example, and how's South Africa, the southern region, doing? And when you look at West Africa, it's a mixed. There you find a mixed picture. There you have the bad stories, and then you have the good stories. There you have Ghana, and perhaps Equatorial Guinea. You have two extremes in Western Africa. Then look at Southern Africa. There you have South Africa, which is a model for press freedom and democracy. And then you have Zimbabwe, which is probably the poster picture for dictatorship, for African dictatorship. So you have a mixed picture in Southern and West Africa, but the situation in East Africa is worse. It's much worse than Western East Africa. And then comes the question, then why? What's the reason? Are we different as a people from Western and Southern Africans? And the question to this answer, of course not, we're not different. We're the same, we're Africans. The same diversity that we have in East Africa, the same ethnic diversity that we have in East Africa, they have in Western and Southern Africa. But this has not stopped them from having press freedom. It's not an impediment. Their ethnic differences and religious differences is not an impediment to press freedom in Western and Southern Africa. So it should not be an impediment in East Africa. How about in terms of socioeconomic profile? And even in terms of socioeconomic profile, we're the same. We are poor. The Eastern Africans, most East Africans live in the countryside, and so do West Africans and Southern Africans. They have not become prosperous. They have not become developed before enjoying press freedom and before enjoying democracy. So poverty and illiteracy, or the fact that most people live in the rural areas and not in the cities, they are not impediments to having democracy and press freedom. So what's the problem in East Africa? Well, I say it's not the people. The people are not to blame. It's the elites. That's where the problem is. We don't have press freedom in East Africa because the elites have failed. It's a crisis of leadership. That's where the problem is. It's the elite that are to blame. It's the politicians that are to blame, not the people. Our diversity is not the problem. Our ethnic diversity is not the problem. Our religious differences is not the problem. It's the elite. And that's where we need to concentrate. Having said this, what do we need to do? What's the solution? We need to mobilize the people to put pressure on the elites. We need to mobilize the people to work for democracy. That's possible. Thanks now to social media. I know the social media has many faults. I know it's been criticized left and right. But it's also a weapon for democracy. We can use it to mobilize the people for democracy. We can mobilize it against the elite, an elite that's self-serving, that's divisive, an elite that's against democracy. And having said this, I'll add one more thing about this whole debate about whether democracy and freedom is relative to culture and history. I've said my part about, about India. I've cited India and Japan as an example. But let me say this, democracy is not about the result. It's not about choice. It's about the process. We can have all humanity can have the same process. When we speak about democracy, we speak about the process, not the choice. The choice depends on history, it depends on culture, but not the process. That's why democracy has been possible. Why in India and Japan and South Africa. So let's not confuse the choice and the process. No one is speaking about the choice. People can choose what they want. People can choose according to their history, according to their culture, but we must all have the same process. We can all have the same process. It's that process that we call democracy. It's that process that we must insist should be the same throughout the world, irrespective of culture, irrespective of history, irrespective of religion, irrespective of region. So I say, in final conclusion, I say that democracy is possible, press freedom is possible in Eastern Africa. We should be, we should be. I'm shocked, as an East African. I'm shocked and embarrassed that there is not a single example where there's, a simple example for press freedom, including Kenya. Now, Kenya is supposed to be the bright spot in the region. But we have seen TV stations being closed in Kenya. That's terrible news. That's terrible news. Not only for Kenya, but for us in Eastern Africa. Because we look towards Kenya for hope. When democracy suffers in Kenya, we suffer as a region. That should not have happened. And we want Kenya to succeed. It's our model in the Horn of Africa. Please, Kenyans, don't fail on democracy. You'll take the region down with you. Let's have this hope in the Horn of Africa. And that hope is Kenya up to now. And we cannot afford to see democracy fail and suffer in Kenya. Thank you. I say, finally, as a final word, I say democracy is possible. It's a crisis of leadership on the part of the elite. It has nothing to do with us as a people. Once we have democracy, then we'll have press freedom. But we cannot have press freedom before democracy. That's very important. We must work on democracy to have press freedom. Thank you.
I'm Ronald, and I'm a cameraman. All the time people think that camera and people just hold camera. But my concern is about leadership. As much as journalists are saying that we're being controlled, 1, 2, 3, but have we ourselves, journalists, try also to take positions? Let's say, have a long, let's say like Russia, the movements that we have, we find that it had a long time. But we as journalists, what plan do we have like 10 years from now? Do we have a plan? 20 years from now, do we have a plan to counterattack what is happening right now? Or just because there are no ways, we just decide to just keep quiet and relax. But we need to take positions in the government. We take positions also in our society. But just all the time we think journalists is all about camera, it's all about editing, it's all about making news. But also we should also change our mind and to take positions so that we can fight while we are inside. Thank you.
Let me add something here. I accept what you said, but let me add one more thing. In the absence of democracy, journalists cannot be indifferent to the question of rights, to the question of democracy. To practice as journalists, as pro-journalists, to practice our profession, we need to have democracy. That's a precondition. So, in a dictatorship, in the absence of democracy, where democracy is absent, all journalists have to judge as human rights activists and as activists for democracy. It's not a choice. You can't be a journalist in the absence of democracy. But in the absence, that doesn't mean that in the absence of democracy that you have to give up on journalism. You must practice your journalism, but at the same time, travel as an activist for human rights and democracy. You must fight for your rights. And your rights will be protected only in the democratic framework. We cannot be an island of freedom in a sea of dictatorship. We will either be all free or we'll all be unfree. We must fight for the freedom of all so that we could enjoy our freedom. We must not fight for our freedom in isolation. That's a mistake. That's our experience in Ethiopia. That's our 2.5 decades experience in Ethiopia. We cannot specifically fight for our freedom. We must fight for the freedom of all. So activism is not a choice in the absence of democracy. It's a must. It's a necessity. Thank you.
We need to ask a question from me. So I was wondering, going back to Ethiopia, we know there are different techniques the government uses to attack the media, development, poverty, terrorism, things like that. So since you have been in the Ethiopian media for a long period, and since you have suffered a lot of human rights repressions because of your work as a journalist and because of your position as a journalist, what do you think on
that? That's a good question. And I begin by asking a question. To answer the question, I begin by asking a question, and that's, which Democrat, which dissident has not been accused of terrorism in Africa, or where there is dictatorship? That's a common charge. Where there is dictatorship, the movement for democracy has always been branded as a terrorist movement. So that's common. So that's why it's not unique to Ethiopia. It's common to all dictatorship. But like I said, press freedom cannot be ensured in isolation. We have to have a holistic view of freedom. That means that in the absence of democracy, press freedom is not possible. That's the lesson from Ethiopia, and this is a lesson that the world should heed. We must not, we have to have a holistic, a comprehensive solution to the problem of press freedom. Unless we have democracy, we cannot have press freedom in isolation. I hope I have answered your question. I don't know.
Hi. One of your suggestions was to use social media as a means of fighting for democracy and freedom of expression. As you may be aware, there are laws coming up already in Uganda, and I think Kenya is following soon, and maybe the other countries. So it seems already the avenue people had found, like bloggers and others who are not even journalists, had found to start expressing these things of freedom, is already being blocked. Therefore, from there, where do we go from there?
We must fight it. By the way, social media has democratized freedom of expression. When there was only the old media, it was becoming an elite phenomenon. It was not the people who were practicing freedom of expression directly. It was a representative of the people, an elite representative of the people who were practicing freedom of expression. But now we have social media. All the mass of the people, everyone is exercising freedom of expression. That should be a welcome development. Freedom of expression should not be an elite experience, and many people don't like that. Many people don't like that. when democracy was, was first came to the world, the argument against democracy was that, the mob, the people, the educated people, cannot choose their government. They're too irresponsible. And democracy should be exercised by the elite, by those who have property. And their people must be educated before they're given democratic rights. And I see the same parallel argument when it comes to social media. The argument is that, unless people are educated in journalism, or unless they have, college education, somehow they're not fit to express their opinions. This is the wrong argument. Social media is welcome because it empowers the people. It has empowered the masses. Now they don't need to go through the media to express themselves. They can speak to each other without need for a media, without need of all media as a media. So the people have been empowered by social media, and we should be protective of that right. Yes, dictatorships hate the social media because it empowers the average person, the masses, and they will come encroaching. They will come to silence social media, and that should be fought. We should struggle against that.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Mongola. Me as a citizen, I'm not a journalist, but I'm very invested in the freedoms, and I want to thank you for linking the greater discussion on freedom of expression, freedom of the media, to the question of democracy. I was struck by a comment somebody made earlier, which was to call on journalists to go into public service as politicians or civil services. Because in Kenya today, one of the biggest, if you want to say, inhibitors to freedom of expression is a former journalist, right? The head of the Kenya, I want to say Censorship Bureau because that's what it wants to be, but Film and Classification Board is at the forefront of shutting down freedom of expression. And just this last week, a ban was put on a film, Rafiki. Now what I'm interested in is the way in which so many of us accept that somebody will say we're not adult enough and responsible enough to make choices for ourselves as adults, so that the Film Censorship Board can ban and not merely classify films. And I'm also interested in the comment, I think John started to speak about it earlier, and Andrew, about what's happening within. And because I'm not a journalist, but I do come from the creative sector, I wonder if you can say something about the way we ourselves, as those who are in the sector, are often complicit. I know we talked about media owners, but I haven't seen very much of journalists speaking out against the banning of Rafiki or against the shutting down of freedom of expression in other forms. Even shutting, when one journalist speaks out, other journalists sometimes are the ones who shut them down. And I wondered if we've talked a lot about the external threats, if you might address what we must do amongst the sector, people from the sector. And thank you very much for what you had to say.
It's shocking to hear that a former journalist has become an unofficial censor here in Kenya. That's terrible. That's terrible news. But this then tells us that journalists are humans after all, and humans are not perfect. So we too have our weaknesses. But this doesn't go against the truth that we hold. That no restrictions should be imposed on freedom of expression. Just like you said, we're adults to choose what we want. We don't need guidance. We don't need guidance from an elite, from a self-appointed elite. Like I said, this was the same argument against democracy 200 years ago. People were not prepared for democracy because they were not educated, because they were not literate, because they were not they did not have property. But then we have seen in the present age that most people even though most people are living in the countryside, and even though most people are poor, as in India, as in South Africa, as in Ghana. But then we can still have democracy. There is no precondition for democracy. Prosperity is not a precondition for freedom and democracy. And the basis of democracy is freedom of expression. That's where it all begins. That's the beginning. Unless you can express yourself, you cannot have democracy. So we must be protective of this right, of all rights. Freedom of expression is the beginning. We must be protective of it, and those of us, and those amongst us, the journalists who are going to the other side, well, to their shame and to their loss, by the way, will go ahead without. And history is on our side, not on their side. And eventually, democracy and freedom of expression shall win. We hope that.
I just sat here and started thinking. I have a question for you. To me, I think our value matters more than democracy. Because if you can give an example, which country has democracy worked? She has said about the former journalist. I think that we should have values. In the past, we had values. But those values that used to guide us. But this democracy, I think, is the values that we have in our society. We should straighten up our values. Because if you can say democracy, I just need an example on where democracy has worked. But from my own opinion, I think we should focus more on creating good values that can help all of us. Values, in the past we had values, good values that we used to live well. But where have we gone wrong? So I think we should go back to the values of our society.
I'm sorry, I need to make a comment, and I need to disagree with you. I have to disagree with you. Because I don't think values have precedence over democracy. By the way, to your question, where has democracy worked? It has worked in the West, you know that. We know that it has worked in the US, it works in Europe, but that's not all. I'm sorry, it's not only the West, where there's prosperity and where there's development. But it's working in India, where there's poverty, and when there's religious, and ethnic diversity in India. India is poor, and there's, tremendous diversity in terms of ethnicity and religion, and it's working in India. And it's working in South Africa, which has a very polarized, history and a very polarized politics even now, and it's working there.
In India, what I know, India there's a big division in India where people treat each other very different. So I don't understand.
Yeah, but the process is working. Democracy is not about the choice. That's about the choice. That's about the choice. You're speaking about the choice. I'm speaking about the process. When we speak about democracy, we're speaking about the process. They have been able to manage their differences peacefully. They haven't resorted to violence, because they're not violent. There's no violence in India because of the differences. That's what we call democracy. But the peace that they have, despite their differences, is what we call democracy. That's democracy. They have been able to live in peace without violence, even though there are great, tremendous discrepancies in terms of ethnicity, in terms of income, in terms of religious views. And that's what we need in Africa. That's why we need democracy. There's ethnic diversity, there are differences, we have plenty of differences, and we need peace. And to bring about that, we need peace and stability. And to bring that peace and stability, we need democracy. So that's what democracy is about. It's management of our differences. So democracy is working, to your question, where democracy is working, it's working everywhere. It's working in Africa, it's working in Latin America, it's working in Asia, and it's the system for humanity. Democracy is not the perfect system, I agree with you. It's not the perfect system, but like Churchill said, it's the only system that works. Mankind has no alternative to democracy. This is the endpoint in our ideological evolution.
Hello, Andrew Franklin. The notion of the media, the democratic space, here's a perfect example. If we have a program in Kenya that we don't use, AGOA, African Growth Opportunities Act, for 18 years, we haven't developed value chains. We don't grow cotton. We don't make buttons. We do not, in fact, export anywhere near the 6,000 items that could be exported to the United States. South Africa exports Beamers and Mercedes. Why do I mention this? The media here, whenever there's something to do with commerce or AGOA, it's usually on a business channel, business segment. If somebody who has an intimate knowledge of business and AGOA offers criticism, but the members of Kenya Association of Manufacturers, KEPSA, KNCCI, in other words, the political class, the private sector in Kenya, will not appear on Ebru TV, CNBC Africa, KTN, with somebody like Andrew Franklin talking about AGOA. So I don't get invited, but they do. But if they ask, is Franklin going to be on the panel? And basically they will not show up. Not because I'm incredibly sarcastic, but I am incredibly well informed. 18 years, and they're not interested in growing jobs. They are not interested in maximizing Kenya's use, or the region, East African community, which is going nowhere after 21 years, to actually develop the country. Now, that has nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with security, nothing to do with police atrocities, imprisoning journalists and attacking journalists. But here we have the media suppressing fact and then demanding protection. I throw that out only to take it away from politics, take it away from questions of terrorism, take it away from questions of, do we need democracy to grow the country? I would suggest yes, because if you can't discuss how 18 years of AGOA have not produced anywhere near the desired reforms, then basically the lack of media space or interest in a subject like that is killing the country. It's killing the country. Therefore, the media owners themselves are killing the country's economy by suppressing fact. That's my comment. Asking for a
Mark, thank you for the comment, and I agree with you. But let me add one more thing. No media in the world is perfect. No media. Even those countries who started media freedom, like Britain and the US, don't have the perfect media. So we're not, we shouldn't demand the perfect media. We should only look for a working media. We need a working environment to develop this media, a mainstream media. So like you said, I agree with your comment, but we can never have the perfect media. That's not achievable because we're not perfect. And the only thing we're demanding is the working environment to develop a mainstream media, and that's what's lacking in authoritarian countries. That's why we should fight the authoritarian countries. And like you said, there's a price to be paid when there is no private media. No space for media freedom. There's a price to be paid in terms of economic development, and that should be taken seriously.
I am just a little saddened by the remark that we need values more than democracy, and I just wanted to draw your attention to a certain fact that the gentleman was perhaps looking at the utilitarian value of democracy, and for you then that democracy must justify itself by then ascribing certain attributes to the individual. And I perhaps from Article 19, and I think from any other, that is the antithesis of everything. That is anarchy. And perhaps where you are, I think Daniel Arap Moi, perhaps possibly Uhuru Kenyatta, possibly Raila, possibly Kamuzu Banda, possibly Botha of Namibia, sorry, of South Africa, possibly Mengistu of Ethiopia, possibly Museveni, Kagame, Salva Kiir, and indeed Trump. We would all be very excited by your statement. And perhaps to draw, perhaps I am in a state of shock that we can then, democracy and human rights is not about utility. You understand? It's not a loss and account, algorithm. Human rights is about you, your right to, you understand? Your right to be respected, treated rightly or wrongly if you are in breach. But do not give laws and account issue. It's not a geometric progression, my friend. Salva Kiir, Uhuru, Raila, they would really love you hearing that. But you see, it is from that's a very slippery road. Let me perhaps point out a certain very just what I'm saying is that you I just wanted us to perhaps to draw this, that for us as Article 19, we are talking about basic human rights for you to be protected. As to whether your values are superior or inferior, therefore, because then we get to racism now there. We get to apartheid, we get to Christianity vis-a-vis religion and what have you. That's a very dangerous, slippery road to get there. I think we're talking about diversity. The right to differ and the right to be protected. Not whether if you differ, you have a car or don't.